but today I'm going to take you through the new planning analytics administrative tools. Um, I suspect most of you have seen some of this. If you haven't, and I'm going too fast, or you want me to compare and contrast to get against what you used to do in TM1 10.2.2, certainly let me know. Our master classes, as John just mentioned, are upcoming. I don't think we have a calendar set up for that yet. We will get that out to you shortly. So the new Planning Analytics Administrative Console is basically embedded inside the Planning Analytics Workspace piece. The good news is for those of you who don't own the Planning Analytics Workspace licenses, you can log in to PAW and use its administrative capabilities. You can also use its modeling capabilities. It's just when you don't own the PAW licenses, you can't build briefing books and things like that. Technically, I think you can. It's just it becomes a licensing problem if you get caught. So within the Planning Analytics administrative interface that's been recently developed, and it's gone through several iterations, right? So in the old TM1 world, say pre-TM1 11, we used this thing called TM1 Top, which was an executable, which allowed you to go in and kind of see what all the users were doing on the system, what kind of resources they were taking up, seeing if any processes were locked behind other processes and that kind of thing. All of that has been put into a much nicer web-based interface where it allows you to manage the users and groups, at least for the PAW set of users and groups. Again, in the new Planning Analytics world, the security in the TM1 database is still managed in the database, and those users and groups currently are separate from the Planning Analytics Workspace users and groups. I believe there's a move afoot within IBM to try and resolve that and make that a more understandable set of administrative techniques to be able to manage those users and groups. In fact, I think something's coming sometime this year, but I don't know that much about it. So within the administrative environment, you can manage PAW users and groups. You can migrate assets with the lifecycle management tool. So within Planning Analytics Workspace, just to explain what this is, all of the objects that if you are in Planning Analytics Workspace building briefing books and such, all of that information is stored in a content store. Technically, it's in a whole bunch of containers, a database under the covers. And in order to be able to copy briefing books from dev to production, or just replicate a book, or take a snapshot of them so you have a backup, you use this tool called Lifecycle Management, and we'll go through that today. With the administrative tool, you can also manage some basic features of your TM1 system. So as IBM is continuously adding new features, you will see in this Manage Features piece, it allows the administrator of the tool to be able to choose whether those features are available to end users or not. Because sometimes, they can complicate things and cause problems for end users. So it gives you the choice to turn features on or off. So we'll go through that again today as well. Monitoring administration, that's just what the old TM1 Top was. It also allows you to secure for the cloud-only world. So the secure gateway piece, again, for everybody, is a direct connection, a virtual private network between your on-prem databases and potentially your planning analytics environment in the cloud. And then you can do some customization of the interfaces of uploading custom fonts, global color palettes, and some of those other things that I'll take you through here shortly. So let's go ahead and take a look. Let me escape out of that. So we are currently in this is the Planning Analytics Workspace. And you have to be an administrator on the system to be able to see this. So this administration tab will come up. And when you click it, basically, it pops up another set of tiles on the screen. And right now you can see what it's doing because I'm on a system that has a whole bunch of servers. It's currently querying all those databases so that we can go in and look at those here in a minute. And then there's a user and groups tile. And then we have the other tiles for each of the features that we talked about a second ago. So let's go ahead and dive into the one I think most of the people would probably be interested in, which is when I click on that database tile, I'm going to go look at, I don't know, I'll pick one of our servers. So when I select the database server from this list, what it allows is it allows you to go in and say, okay, one, what is the current status of it? This little, it gives you a healthy or kind of a warning sort of icon graphic. It tells you the amount of memory usage on the server, the CPU it's currently using, and when it was last started. The nice part is you can go in and stop, restart the server. You can even end the process if you had to. So that was a nice touch because sometimes you used to have to go, RDP into the system to go ahead and fiddle with that. So that really makes this new administrative environment quite nice. You can also set up some basic alerts on the system. So if you want to set up some memory usage thresholds or CPU usage thresholds, as well as kind of big, I wouldn't do many of these memory or CPU usage thresholds because TM1 is designed to use all the CPUs on the box that it can if you have it set up that way. But some of the nice pieces are if the database is unresponsive for more than, say, 60 seconds, that can be useful. And then, or a maximum wait time. So what this means is if you have users who are trying to update, let's say, a PAX worksheet, and the server is busy doing something else, maybe data loading, where they're updating a dimension or something else, and that process has locks, and it's not allowing the users to get in there. This maximum thread time is a nice warning when you set that up. And you can set this up such that it will send out emails to your administrators and those kinds of things. But I leave you to your imagination as to how you'd want to set all of these things up. It's really quite unique to each user's individual system and the way that they sort of use it. The piece that you will probably go ahead and recognize is this is basically a replacement for TM1 Top. And the nice thing about this is it is just web-based. We have asked them, this is, again, an administrative thing, but we do have certain clients who want to be able to see the activity on the system to know if there's some reason that their work is getting slowed down. Let's say their reports aren't working as quickly as they wanted to, or there's a little delay. A lot of our clients want to be able to get to this screen. So I do believe IBM is administrative users. And what it's doing is you'll see about I think it's every 5 seconds up here under the settings, you can change the auto refresh. So it polls the TM1 database and provides a list of what are called all the running threads. I'll just let it run every 10 seconds. I am currently the person logged into this database. This one is actually me. This thread is me running this administrative tool. And there's a couple other users in the system, but they're not doing anything. If they were doing something, you'd see this would be a run state, and it would tell you how long they've been waiting. If they've been waiting, it would talk about any of the read or write locks that are trying to be acquired to do the activity that they want to do. one of our master classes is going to talk through how do you do that investigation if you are having locking issues on your server. We have several clients who weren't quite aware that some of the things they'd be doing would cause database locks and unnecessarily slowing down their users. So this tool is very, very useful for going to diagnose those items and hopefully address them, because there's a lot of things we can do to mitigate locking and contention in a database like this. There's several other columns that you can go look at. I've just selected a few of them here. You can tell what object it's working on, the type of object, whether it's a TI process or a chore or a subset or something like that. And then if you ever run into a case where something's locked, you can click on these two ellipses here, and you can cancel the thread if it were a running thread, or you could also disconnect that user. So that's a nice feature for it to be web-based. Moves the planning analytics piece really into the 21st century in terms of being able to manage the system a little easier without having to go into some of the back-end tools via RDP. And then this is a configuration tool where you can go in and modify some of the configurations for your specific system. So TM1S config, rather than going to manage that TM1S config file, you can manage it here. So if you wanted to go look at multi-threaded querying and how many CPUs the system is using, you could set it here, again, rather than having to go in to the TM1S config file and set that. So with that, given that we do have a smaller audience, I'm happy to entertain any questions about this. So if anybody has, please feel free, if you want to type in the chat, about any of these pages of the database pieces, because this is really replacing what was known as TM1 Top, and it actually is quite nice. It is much more robust in terms of being able to manage users and also understand what's going on in the system under the covers to be able to do some performance tuning. So that's the administration tool for the databases. If I want to work backwards,
there
I
is
can
one
go.
question, Chris, in the
Sure.
chat. What is the end process button referring to? What process?
Let me see where we are. So where would that have been under? So as we all know, TM1 can occasionally, the actual thread can get stuck. So if you happen to be on a Windows server, and you guys are familiar with, Task Manager, sometimes the thread is actually completely stuck. You can't do anything with it. And so what you sometimes have to do, I'm showing Windows Task Manager here, is I could go in here and select one of these items and say end task or end the process. And that physically, this button, end process, is the equivalent of just killing the program. So typically you do a stop, because that allows the database, the TM1 database, to shut down, go through its process of figuring out if any of the cubes have been changed, save that data back to disk. If you click this end process button, that goes ahead and it will just shut off the server completely without saving any of the data. It's a much more violent way to stop the server. Sometimes you have to do that because it's locked up, but that's what that does. Any other questions there, John?
No, that's the only other one. I in terms of multi-threaded querying, I'd be curious. Feel free to put it in the chat. But how many of you have that enabled in your planning analytics environment? And you can say, I don't know. That's also an answer. but there are some things about multi-threaded querying, and I think you said we could cover that in a master's class. But it's a question that comes up a lot, and that is, what are the considerations I need to have for turning that on? What do I need to be aware of?
So that is something we could do in a master's class. But if people have questions about that, absolutely. If you got some quick ones in the chat, let us know. But multi-threading querying, so everybody knows, is if you have 4 CPUs on your server, or in some cases, our clients have 128 CPUs, you can define on that database how many, let's just go do it, performance, multi-threaded queries. You can tell how many individual CPUs get used to resolve a user's query. So if you said, go sum up for me all of my 2020 sales by product, right? That's going to issue a query to the TM1 database. The TM1 database is going to in turn figure out how do I want to slice up that query. 8 CPUs on your server, you could give it all 8 CPUs. It would slice that query up into 8 individual queries and return, honestly, in 1/8 the time. What this setting does is the negative one, you could set it to, let's say, 8 cores if you had 8 cores on your server. So if we just typed in 8, it would use, this is the number of threads to use from this piece. So what they want to do here is -1 means if you had 8 cores on your box, it would allow it to use 7. The advantage of that is there's system operating components that really would like to have access to the CPU while the TM1 database is trying to resolve your queries. So that's what that says. And this would be, keep 2 open, keep 4 open, that kind of thing. But that's basically MTQ, and we will go through that in one of our master classes, is some of the setup to optimize your system to really use your hardware as much as possible. So that's the TM1 top / looking at threads, canceling users, that kind of thing. I'm going to go back to the administration page. Yeah? John, was there a question?
No, that's great. We have a question: how and where to open this TM1 website? Oh,
So,
I think how to get to this administrative page, I think is the question.
okay. So what that is on your homepage of your Planning Analytics workspace. You'll see, folks, I'm using version, I think it's 60. Yeah. So this is a cloud. This is the most current version. I'm using it in the IBM cloud here. And you'll notice that this interface to Planning Analytics Workspace may be different than the one you have. At about version 57, so 3 versions ago, approximately 3.5 months or so, 4, they revamped this interface to make use of some of the Cognos objects, because Cognos has the same interface as Planning Analytics. So they did a bunch of under the covers plumbing to make them share the same code base. So that's why this looks a little different. So in terms of launching and getting to the administration pane, when you log into Planning Analytics Workspace and you are an administrator, and I'll actually just click the button here. So I'll show you, here's how we manage user and groups by clicking this. You have to be set as an administrator to go ahead and see that tile pop up on your screen. So if you don't see it, you want to talk to the administrator of your TM1 system, and you'd have to have that role. Now, granted, that has a licensing connotation to it, so not everybody is going to want to do that, okay? But this is where, within this space, you can control users and groups and what their access is to planning analytics. So there's a basic analyst, there's the administrators we just talked about, there's a consumer, and a modeler. John, are you completely familiar with the differences between these?
From a licensing standpoint, yes.
Yeah, just what
Yeah.
can you just describe, because it would actually educate me as well.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Administrator can do everything. That's not surprising. So security server administration is the primary difference between that and a modeler. So a modeler is then the power user. So they can input they can read data, and they can also make changes to the actual cube structures and data flow and dimensions. And then a consumer is read only, so they can use all the interfaces and have access. So licensing wise, it would depend on the licensing model you're on, but for the most part, there's three different types of users. There's an administrator, there's a read write user, and there's a read only user. That they break it up into analyst and modeler. I think that's more just you can break up the functionality. So you want someone to be able to read and write, but you don't want them to be able to have the ability to change cube structures.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, an analyst can go in and create briefing books and
Yep.
save them and modify them, where a consumer is a truly read only. So a consumer is not, it's a read only from the Planning Analytics workbook perspective. They can use workbooks, they can edit and change TM1 data. They just can't save that PAW briefing book. Correct?
Consumer should be read only in that they can slice and dice, but they can't actually change any numbers in the
Oh,
environment. Yeah.
well, that's why I'm not involved in licensing. Okay. So
And
here
you
are
can
the,
make, yeah, go ahead.
no, please.
No, I was going to have you make me an administrator while you're in there, but that's not important. That's not the purpose of this.
You know what? Why don't I go do that while we're here? That's just as easy. So I've just made John an administrator so he can go potentially mess things up. Um,
Exactly. It'll be my fault.
all right. So here's where you would go add groups. I don't have any in here. You can also, there's a manage button down here if you wanted to upload your groups. Again, the groups in this PAW world are different than the groups in your TM1 world. So just be wary of that, because this is really about the users and groups specifically for Planning Analytics Workspace. It has nothing to do with the users and groups that are actually managing the TM1 security within the TM1 database. And then this is just an environment settings piece, but that's the two. So we've covered the database pieces. This is where you go to look for locking and performance tuning and who's logged into the system, that kind of stuff. This is setting up users and groups. The lifecycle management tab allows you to go in and create snapshots, and I'll show you how this process works. So what a snapshot is let's just go see if I can pull up some data. So if I said, okay, I want to go look and pull up just briefing books, and I only want to pull ones that are related to a particular server. Okay. So I can hit apply, and what it does is it goes and finds out a list of briefing books that are available to me to do something with. So if I wanted to grab a particular set of books, I'd pick two of them. Okay. And the cool part is it actually tells you the cubes that that book interacts with and the database and everything else. And I could say add to cart, which puts it over in this third column here. And when I click export, okay, that will allow me to give it a name. Let's just go ahead and call it test. What it's going to do is actually download all of the content. Remember we talked about under the covers, that there's several databases and components underneath Planning Analytics Workspace called microservices that work together that generate these briefing books and everything you see. That has now been stored into this test folder, and you can see it got downloaded directly to my desktop. I could then in turn take this file, this zip file, and I could then import it back into another server if I wanted to. So that's what this lifecycle management tool allows you to do, is manage PAW books, move them from dev to QA to prod, that kind of thing. Here's a customizations tab that allows you to go in and all this is really doing is telling you that when the users go click, if they go to Planning Analytics Workspace, this gives them the option to go ahead and download the latest version of Planning Analytics for Excel. What this actually does here is if you did it locally, it downloads it and stores the copy locally so that your users, when they're in PAW, can download it and update their version of Excel. It's a short way of, rather than somebody having to go to the IBM website and downloading the latest version when they're in the PAW environment, they can just click a button and get this. This is a nice feature a lot of people have been asking for, is color palettes. So you can now go in and define your own color palette to match your company's colors. So you could click the button. I'm not going to go through all this. It's pretty self-explanatory, but you could create your own custom color palettes and control the hues and the color and make it match exactly what you want your users to use for consistency across all of their charts and graphs. And that color palette even applies to objects on the screen. The other piece they've added, I don't have any fonts here, but you can upload your corporate specific font so that this planning analytics environment we see, you can control what fonts show up in the cube viewer versus the subset editor versus all those different pieces. So they've added some nice customization there. This is the features piece that I talked about. So certain features that are forthcoming. There will be one coming called Dynamic Query, which is going to be really more of a planning analytics for Excel feature. So it may or may not show up in this list, but it's when they put in new features, they'll put them in this list and it'll show up, and it'll, for the first, I don't know, 2 or 3 iterations, you would have the choice to be able to enable it for your users or disable it. So it gives you some control as to what gets deployed to those users. Right now, there's nothing new in version 60 that I could turn on or off. And then the secure gateway, this is where we would go to set up a connection, a private VPN connection to your on-prem databases and connect it up to your planning analytics in the cloud. But basically, folks, that's the entire administration pane within Planning Analytics Workspace. It is quite nice that it's become GUI based, and there's some nice standard web kind of things for sorting and filtering lists and things like that. But it's quite useful. It really is way, way better than TM1 Top. Additionally, it provides substantially more diagnostic information. It's a little harder to get to, but it provides information that TM1 Top can't. So that's the administration. What's new in Planning Analytics Administration? Are there any questions while we're here? Because that's all I have to wrap up this.
All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, we'll thank you for participating and keep an eye out for details regarding our master's class, and have a great, oh wait, we do have a question. Do you think IBM will ever make it possible for us to delete users from the user list on PAW?
Somebody must have been looking at the blogs. Yes, it's coming. They realized that was a miss. And I think, to be honest with you, I believe it is in version 60. Let's go ahead and look. And just, this is probably useful for people to go ahead and, if you go to the Planning Analytics Workspace knowledge base, they always have this kind of what's new features, okay? And they break it out into Planning Analytics. So this is the TM1 database. But in Workspace, and I think I actually read that somewhere when I scanned these, delete a folder of a removed user. So I suspect if they did that, maybe they'd allow you to delete the user. Now on cloud, I think it's different than on-prem. So I've never I've never deleted a user, to be honest with you, but I'm hoping IBM would have those capabilities, given that they now have the ability to delete a folder from a user who was once on your system. Apparently here it used to just leave it abandoned and create it as an unnamed folder, and you could just never get rid of it. So, John,
That's it. Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
thank you all.
Thanks.
You